My future mother-in-law threatened to boycott our wedding over a prenup. I let her boycott herself right out of our lives. I built my company from nothing when I was 23 years old. I started with a small online business selling handmade jewelry and grew it into a brand that now operates in 12 countries. By the time I was 30, I had more money than I ever imagined possible. I bought my parents a house. I paid off my sister's student loans. I invested wisely and watched my wealth multiply. Everything I had came from my own hands and my own ideas and years of sleepless nights building something real. I met my fiancé Graham at a charity event 2 years ago. He worked as a high school teacher and made a modest salary that he loved because he genuinely cared about educating kids. He had no idea who I was when we started talking. He just thought I was a woman in a nice dress who laughed at his terrible jokes. We exchanged numbers and went on a date that weekend. I didn't tell him about my money until our third date because I wanted to make sure he liked me for me. When I finally explained what I did and how successful the company had become, he looked surprised, but not interested in the way I'd seen from other men. He didn't ask how much I was worth. He didn't suddenly start suggesting expensive restaurants. He just said that was impressive and asked if I wanted to split the check like we'd been doing. I knew then that Graham was different. We dated for 18 months before he proposed with a ring he saved for over a year to afford. It wasn't expensive by my standards, but it meant everything because he earned every penny himself. I said yes immediately, and we started planning our wedding. That's when I met his mother Opal, and everything got complicated. Opal was pleasant enough during our first few meetings. She asked about my work, and I kept things vague because I didn't want to make a big deal about the money. She knew I owned a business, but I don't think she understood the scale until she visited my house for the first time. I live in a gated community in a 5-bedroom home with a pool and a view of the mountains. When Opal walked through the front door, her entire demeanor changed. She started asking very specific questions. She asked how much the house cost. She asked if I owned it outright or had a mortgage. She asked about my investments and my retirement accounts and my future plans for the business. I answered politely but briefly. I didn't like where this was going. After that visit, Opal became intensely interested in the wedding. She offered to help plan everything. She suggested vendors and venues and caterers. Every suggestion happened to be the most expensive option available. She said her son deserved the best, and since I could clearly afford it, why not go all out? I told her Graham and I wanted something simple and meaningful. She said simple was code for cheap and people would talk. When I mentioned the prenup to Graham, he understood completely. He said he'd sign whatever made me comfortable because he wasn't marrying me for money. He said he'd been poor his whole life and planned to keep working regardless of what I had. He said protecting what I built before we met was just common sense. I loved him even more for that response. Opal had a very different reaction. Graham made the mistake of mentioning the prenup during a family dinner. Opal put down her fork and stared at me like I'd insulted her entire bloodline. She asked if I didn't trust her son. I said I trusted him completely, but this was standard practice when one partner had significant assets. She said standard practice was for celebrities and billionaires who thought they were better than everyone else. She asked if I thought I was better than her family. I said this had nothing to do with being better. I said I built my company before I met Graham, and I wanted to protect it the same way I would protect any business asset. The dinner ended badly. Opal didn't speak to me when we left. Graham apologized the whole drive home and promised to talk to her. He said she'd come around once she understood the prenup wasn't about distrust. She didn't come around. She got worse. Opal called me directly the next week and said she would not attend our wedding if we signed prenup. She said no mother should have to watch her son marry someone who already planned for their divorce. She said Graham deserved someone who would share everything with him unconditionally. I told her the prenup was happening regardless of her feelings. She said then she wouldn't be at the wedding. She hung up before I could respond. Graham was devastated. Opal was demanding I risk everything I'd built to prove my love to a woman who'd known me for less than a year. I decided to call her bluff. I told Graham we should proceed with the wedding exactly as planned, prenup included. If his mother wanted to boycott, that was her choice. He agreed reluctantly. We sent out invitations. We booked the venue. We arranged catering and flowers and music. We did everything without Opal's input since she'd made it clear she wasn't participating. Opal assumed I would crack under pressure. She told Graham's sister that I would come crawling back once I realized how serious she was. She told relatives she was standing on principle, and I would eventually see reason. She waited for me to call and beg her to come to the wedding. I never called. 2 weeks before the wedding, Opal reached out to Graham asking for an update on the prenup situation. He told her we signed it last month. She exploded. Full story on channel. Link below.
I walked out of my own graduation dinner and haven't spoken to them since. I was the first person in my family to get a degree. I want to say that up front because it matters to what happened. My family has a story about itself in which hard work means physical work and visible work and tangible output. And a degree from a university sits outside that story somewhere. And I had always known that. And I sat down at that table on the night of my graduation and I thought, tonight will be different. Tonight they will see it. I worked for 4 years. I held down a part-time job for most of those years to cover my rent. I graduated with a result I was genuinely proud of. And my parents booked a restaurant and invited the extended family. And I pressed a shirt and sat down at the table thinking that one evening, just one single evening, was going to be about something I had actually done. My dad gave a toast. He spoke for about 8 minutes and I timed it on my phone. He talked about his own career and the decisions he had made in his 30s and why they had been the right ones. He talked about how hard he and my mom had worked when they were young and what they had given up and what they had sacrificed and how little of it had been easy. He talked about a job he had walked away from to start his own business and what a risk that had been and how much courage it had taken. He talked about my brother's A-levels and spent a reasonable amount of time on how proud they had been when he got the grades he needed for his course. He mentioned my graduation exactly twice. Once at the beginning when he said he supposed I should be congratulated on finishing, and once at the end when he said he hoped I would now think seriously about finding something stable. He hoped I would now think about finding something stable. He said that at my graduation dinner. After 4 years of all of it, I had just spent 4 years studying for something I had chosen and worked for. I had a job offer already confirmed in writing before the ceremony. I had not asked him for money. I had not asked him for advice. I had not asked him for a single thing. I put my napkin down on the table. I pushed my chair back. I said I was sorry, but I needed some air and I did not come back. I walked to my car and I drove to my flat and I sat on my sofa for about an hour without moving, and then I called my girlfriend and I told her what had happened. She listened without saying much, and she did not tell me what I should have done differently, and that was exactly what I needed from her. My mom called me that night. She said my dad had meant it as a joke, and that he had not intended for any of it to land the way it did, and that the whole family was worried about me leaving the way I did, and that I should have simply come back to the table and not made a scene. I told her I had been sitting at that table for most of my life, at every family occasion and every family dinner, waiting for a joke from him that actually felt like one, and I had finally run out of patience. She said I was being unfair. I told her I had been very patient. She said I had embarrassed everyone by walking out. I told her I had not felt particularly celebrated by anyone before I left, and that those two things seemed connected to me, and that she was very very welcome to think about why that might be. I have not spoken to either of them in 11 months. My brother sent me one text about a week after the dinner to tell me I was being oversensitive and that Dad had meant well. I did not reply. My dad has never called. I do not think he entirely understands why I walked out. I have thought about this for 11 months and I have gone over it many times. I am not sure he could understand it even if I tried to explain it to him directly, and that is the part that is almost more than I can sit with, not the toast. The fact that there is nothing I could say to him that would land. Subscribe for more stories.
I gave my husband an ultimatum, his mom or me. My mother-in-law Diane has never pretended to like me. Most people in her position at least try. Diane decided somewhere around the 3rd month of me dating her son Tom that I was not what she had planned for him, and she has spent the 6 years since making that known in every way short of saying it directly. She has told Tom's friends I was controlling. She has told Tom's sister that I had a spending problem, which is completely untrue. She turned up at our house unannounced 11 times in the first year of our marriage, let herself in with a key she had copied without asking us, and rearranged things in my kitchen because she said it made more sense her way. She called Tom every single day, often during dinner, and when I suggested once that maybe a boundary might help, Diane told Tom I was trying to isolate him from his family. Tom told me she was just anxious and would settle down. She did not settle down. The thing that ended it happened 3 months ago. I had a miscarriage at 9 weeks. Tom and I had told nobody because it was early and we were being cautious. After I lost the pregnancy, I was not okay in the way you are not okay after something like that, the quiet kind where you go through the days but something underneath has shifted. I told Tom I needed a few weeks before we said anything to his family. He agreed. Diane called me 2 weeks after the miscarriage. She asked me coldly why I was keeping Tom from visiting her. I told her we had been going through something difficult, and I would explain when I was ready. She asked me what I could possibly have going on that was more important than Tom's relationship with his mother. I told her I had just had a miscarriage. There was a pause. Then she said she was sorry for my loss, and then she asked me whether I thought my emotional instability might be why. We were having trouble conceiving. I put the phone down. I went to Tom and I told him what she had said, word for word. He sat very still. He said that was unacceptable and he would talk to her. I told him I needed more than a conversation. I told him I had spent 6 years managing Diane. 6 years of her undermining me and letting herself into our home and telling his friends things about me that were not true and calling every day to remind him that she came first. And then she had used my miscarriage against me in the same breath as her condolences, and I was done. I told him that Diane did not come to our house again, did not have a key, did not call during dinner, did not have any access to information about our lives that we had not chosen to share with her, or I was leaving. I told him I loved him and I was serious, and he had time to think about it, but not very much time. He cried. I let him. He said his mom was complicated, and she didn't always understand how things landed. I told him I knew that, and it was his job to make her understand, not mine, and I had been covering for her for 6 years, and I was finished. He called Diane the following morning while I was in the house. I sat in the kitchen and I could hear the shape of the conversation through the wall. She cried. She said I was manipulative and had always been the problem. I heard Tom say clearly that what she had said to me on the phone was not something he was going to look past, and that things were going to change. I heard her hang up on him. Tom came into the kitchen and sat down across from me. He said he had told her the key was to be returned by the end of the week, and visits would be arranged in advance from now on, and that the phone call had been unacceptable, and he had said so. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long to say it to her. I believed him. I still do. Diane returned the key. She has not been to our house unannounced since. She has not apologized, and I am not holding my breath. But Tom stood up. That was the thing I needed to know. Subscribe for more stories.